Dzień dobry wszystkim. W ten niedzielny poranek. Dziękuję, że wszystkim wam się chciało wstać i przyjechać, ale myślę, że to jest nie lada gratka, żeby się spotkać z tak wspaniałymi osobami jak nasi goście honorowi dzisiaj. I mamy dzisiaj przed sobą Francis Malkin, Zofia Sherman i Renata Frenkel. Tak jest. Jeśli pamiętacie, przygotowywaliście dla nich laurki, obrazki, listy i to było z okazji dnia poświęconego osobom ocalałym z Holokaustu. No i teraz macie szansę po prostu się z tymi osobami spotkać. Będziemy dzisiaj prowadzić spotkanie w języku angielskim, ponieważ nie wszyscy nasi goście mówią dobrze po polsku, więc chcemy, żeby wszystko mogli zrozumieć, ale także nagrywamy nasze spotkanie, które będzie później dostępne w internecie oraz będzie mogło być pokazywane w innych szkołach, żeby więcej uczniów mogło skorzystać z waszego dzisiejszego spotkania i posłuchać historii, które nasze gościnie mają do opowiedzenia. Także tak, today our meeting is honoring and commemorating again our survivors of the Holocaust. And we have today with us the Consul General Adrian Kubicki as well. He will open the meeting and welcome everybody in a second. Our guests are Francis Malkin, Mrs. Zofia Sherman, and Ms. Renata Frenkel. And this is the continuation and the meeting which is following the event that we did in January this year, and it was the commemoration of the Holocaust Survivors Day. And you prepared letters and some drawings, etc., beautiful small gifts to our honored guests. Also, this the whole project, let's say, was done in cooperation with the Polish Supplementary School Council of America, and the president Dorota Andraka is today with us. They also delivered and I just purchased the beautiful sandwiches and other snacks that you will be able to taste after the meeting. And the other organization that cooperated with us during the January event was the Polish school at the Consulate General of the Republic of Poland in New York. And we have 3 kids from them as well. So welcome everybody. Now I give the floor to our Consul General.
Dear ladies, Holocaust survivors, dear families, teachers, but in particular children and teenagers engaged in our project. The project that hasn't really started this year. It started in 2021 when we were all struggling with COVID. I don't know if you remember, there was a time when we were locked down. From the moment that I assumed this office, and it was actually 10 days before the major lockdown in 2020, I took it as one of the keys of my mission to bring together 2 generations. One generation that is passing the torch to another generation, the generation of people, including myself, who never experienced the evil and the tragedy of war, but still has a chance to connect with those who survived and has this experience that can share and will maybe, perhaps, we hope not, but it might be useful for the future and gives us, first of all, the beautiful example, what is the desire posture and how to stand up against the evil. And this is the living lesson. So when we were approaching the anniversary in 2021, the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz in January, we couldn't do much because obviously we were disconnected because of COVID, everyone was locked down. But we figured that if we do the lesson, and I thank to Madam President of the Polish Saturday Schools and all the teachers and the directors of the schools for agreeing very rapidly to join us with this project. If we organize the lesson about the Holocaust and prepare those messages, there were various messages along the line, letters, pictures, something that on one hand will be meaningful for the Holocaust survivors, will give them the message and that we remember them and we remember what happened to them, but also will be a great chance to run this lesson and have an in-depth discussion of what happened during the Second World War and what was the result of it. We figured that this is beyond priceless, I'd say. And it's been very successful. We delivered those messages first year to over 40 Holocaust survivors here in the region. Obviously, it's very difficult to map them all. We never had contacts with obviously most of them, but we did a lot of work and research to find as many as we can, and those messages were sent out. And then we ran this project again in 2022 and then in 2023. But our major desire was being able to having this meeting here at the consulate, perhaps maybe in the future in the schools, so we can have a continuation. So the children and yourself who were drawing, writing those letters, have a chance to really connect in the real life with people to whom you wrote those letters and wrote these pictures. Because the idea of the project was that those pictures and those letters were not anonymous. The children were giving with the list of names and they were writing to particular people. Now, so many has changed since we started this project in 2021. It's really sad to acknowledge that since we believe that perhaps our generation will not have to go through the tragedy of war, the war is knocking to our door. Poland is not under war with any country, but Ukraine is, and that impacts a lot. We have pictures all over the internet and in the TV, and somehow we feel that this evil is approaching us again, obviously in a different form. So I think with that in mind, having this meeting is even more important and more pivotal. Very recently, a couple of weeks ago, we celebrated the 80th anniversary of the Ghetto Uprising, the first uprising of the Second World War. Very brave uprising of people who didn't really have many odds to win against Germany, but they decided to stand up against the oppression, and also gave a beautiful example to the future fighters. Some historian says they inspired the Warsaw Uprising that happened later. What is important to point out at this point is that those uprisers was obviously Jewish people held in the ghetto, but they were Polish citizens. And the reason why, the major reason, there are two reasons why we have to keep the memory of those heroes and all Holocaust victims and Holocaust survivors alive are following. First and foremost, this is the only way we can really assure that it never happens again. And this is our mutual mission. This transmission that we are creating right now, we started creating them by writing letters and drawings, but now during this meeting we create a bridge, this connection. When you have a chance, or rather we ask you to pass your experience to the next generation, young generation of people. And maybe this will inspire us to combat anti-Semitism, any form of hatred. This is very important to us. But secondly, every time when we talk and commemorate Holocaust, it is a big tragedy of Jewish people. But I repeat it constantly that this is also a big tragedy of Polish people, because Poland lost during Holocaust, lost very valuable, precious Polish citizens as well. 3 million of them, half of the entire amount of people whose lives were lost during Holocaust. And we never rebuilt after that. People say that if Second War would have never happened, and Germans would not invade Poland and organize this machinery of Holocaust, Warsaw would be the most vibrant and the largest Jewish city in the world. Jewish people and Polish people had a wonderful living together for over 1,000 years. Poland was the only safe place for Jewish people who were expelled from all over Europe and ended up in Poland, being able to develop their culture. And their culture was a part of our culture as well. Because of the Holocaust, it was interrupted, and because Poland was pushed towards the east and towards the Soviet, another form of occupation, we were never able to rebuild that. And now we're discussing some issues of the Polish-Jewish relations. If you think about it, it's outrageous, because the Polish-Jewish relations were always great in the past, obviously with some issues which we also have to discuss. But given the other relations with Jewish people in other places of Europe, Poland was a shining example. But now we're trying to restore it in various ways, and this is one of the ways to learn about your experience in Holocaust. But maybe if we have a chance and we have a time, maybe we can learn a little bit of your life back in Poland before the Holocaust, before the Second World War, to learn a little bit of how you found yourself in Poland before this nightmare started. So there is plenty of things to talk about. We are right now about to share the beauty and the most dark parts of our mutual history. And to the young generation of people here in the room, this leaves you with a message. The message is, and the task actually, the task is to pass it along to all the people who are not here in the room. Everything what you learn here from the Holocaust survivors, our dear ladies, your obligation is to pass it along to other people and inspire other people, because this is against the hatred, this is against the anti-Semitism, this is to understand what is the mechanism of the evil, so it's not happening again in Ukraine and other places in the world. This is a very important mission. So take advantage of it. I wish you a fruitful meeting. I will stay with you as long as I can. However, at 10:30 I have to depart for the flag raising. We're approaching the Constitution Day, the national holiday of Poland, which is celebrated throughout the week. The Constitution, which by the way was granting people of different ethnicities and different religions back in the end of the 18th century in Poland, all the rights and equality, which also stands for what Poland was before all the occupation started. So again, enjoy, if this is the word, enjoy and take the most of this meeting here. I thank our Holocaust survivors for accepting our invitation. It is very precious for us to have you here at the consulate. And I thank to all young people here for being engaged in this project. It means a lot already. We're really proud of you, and we thank your parents for working with you on this project and on many other projects. And obviously, as always, to the entire organization of Polish schools and the Consulate School for carrying this torch and inspiring people and being so beautifully responsive to some of our ideas that we have. And we have a lot of ideas also for the future. So thank you very much, and without further ado, I wish you a wonderful discussion.
Thank you, Consul General, for this inspiring talk. And now let me just quickly explain what is going to be the second part of the meeting. So we will start with Mrs. Malkin, who will talk to you for a bit, and then you will be asking questions. And then Mrs. Sherman, and then at the end, Mrs. Frankel. So story, questions, story, questions, story, questions, and then there is also a surprise, a beautiful one. I hope everybody's going to enjoy it immensely. And then we have time for some more conversations and some food and drinks. Thank you so much, and let's start this second part of the meeting.
Thank you. because I have an essential tremor and sometimes my voice is hard to hear. Okay, my name is Frances Malkin, Fran, or Faye as my family called me. I was born in 1938 in a town called Sokal, which at that time was Poland. Polish was my first language, and I don't speak it anymore. I was born in 1938. In 1938 is when Germany declared war on Poland, and England declared war on Germany. And Poland was divided between the Soviet Union, Russia today, and Germany. Our section became part of the Soviet section. Sokal is near Lvov, which is the main city in the area, and it's about an hour from there. It's now in the Ukraine, both of these towns, but it was right on the border. There were 6,000 Jews who lived in Sokal. The other population was Polish and Ukrainian. When the communists came in, they took everything away because this my mother told me, under communism, you have no personal freedom. The government owns everything. So my mother and father had a confectionery store. They would import goods from all over Europe. Her family were in the cattle business. They would ship cattle all over Europe. And their life was good. They were comfortable. There was a nice culture in Sokal. I have some photos of them, which I wasn't able to bring, very few. And then, so the Soviets, when they came in, my mother lost their business, they lost their income, they lost their lives. And because under communism, nobody had anything. And when they took it away from the government, it wasn't anything. So in 1941, the Germans entered our town. Now, I was 2.5 years old at the time, so I'm going to refer to a diary that my mother's brother kept, my uncle. You see, when I came to this country, I was 10 years old and never spoke to my family about the Holocaust experience. So my first 10 years of life were there, and then I came here and I wiped it out. Nobody spoke about it, none of the Jews did. Now, when my mother's brother passed away, his sons had his diary translated into English and published it. I would like to read you a few paragraphs. He describes it. The Germans captured all of Sokal on June 22, 1941. Less than an hour after fighting broke out between the armies of Hitler and Stalin, the Ukrainian population, who had pretended to be staunch communists under the Soviets, welcomed the columns of Nazi tanks with bouquets of flowers and shouts of Heil Hitler. As a reward for their cooperation, the Ukrainian turncoats who had run the town under the Russians were allowed to keep their jobs under the Germans. Sokol was a town that had about 20-some thousand population. There were 6,000 Jews, there were Polish, and there were the Ukrainians. A Ukrainian by the name of Chernetsky was appointed mayor of Sokol and immediately organized the Ukrainian militia to carry out the orders of the Germans. On June 30th, 1941, all Jewish males between the ages of 14 and 60 were ordered to report to the town square. When the Jews arrived at the Targowice, he uses, I guess, the Polish word for it, a crowd of Ukrainians was already there, waiting for them, dressed in their Sunday best, as if they had been all been invited to a party. Some big shots took over and announced that 400 Jewish males were required for labor assignments. Then they proceeded to select 400 professionals, businessmen, workers, and ordinary able-bodied individuals, and turned them over to a detachment of SS men. Those were just killing squads of the German. Among the 400 selectees was Eli Letzter, my sister Leah's husband. Now, they went out when the Germans promised they would give them jobs. They didn't have jobs for the last 2 years under the Soviets. So the 400 were marched off to a brick factory just outside Sokol. There they were shot and their bodies tossed into a mass grave. That is how my sister lost her husband and my baby niece, Faye, her father. I don't remember my father. I was 2.5 years old. My mother told me that, he went, before he went out, he picked me up, he hugged me, he kissed me, he cried. Maybe he had a premonition, but because everything in town, they had no work, no income, nothing, so he went out. And the Germans always said, "We're taking you to work." If you've seen pictures of Auschwitz, they say, "Arbeit macht frei," which is work makes you free. So my first memories are, they opened the ghetto some months later. And I was, I guess, 3.5 at that point. And all the Jews had to come into the ghetto, move into the ghetto. I think what they did all over, the Germans did all over Europe, was they created ghettos in the cities where there were Jews and had all the Jews come in the ghettos. Because Hitler's plan, he had 2 plans. One was to conquer the world, and he did pretty good job of that at that time until he was stopped. And the other was to kill every Jew in the world, because he saw Jews as a different race, that it was in their blood. They were Jewish. So if you converted to Christianity, it didn't save you because you were Jewish. And the Jews that were supposed to be killed were all up to the 3rd generation. So when you had a ghetto, all the Jews were forced to come into one place. In our town, there was a barbed wire around it. And you didn't have to go hunting for Jews. They were all located in one place. It was very clever there. There was a train that ran from our town. These were cattle cars, to a place called Belzec. Now, Belzec isn't known because it was a death camp. You hear about Auschwitz because it was a work camp and a death camp. Like they needed the Jewish labor to help them to dispose of the people they killed, which is a crude way of saying it. So the way they did it in the ghettos, they would have an action, they called them actions. The Germans would come storming in to the ghetto, round up as many Jews as they got a hold of. In the action, they would put them on the cattle cars in Sokal. What they told them was, we're not going to kill you, we're going to take you to work. Now, bring all your belongings with you, money, food, anything. The full cattle cars went off from the railroad station about an hour away to Belzec. When they got to Belzec, they'd say, we're not going to kill you. We're going to take you to work, bring everything with you. But first you have to take a shower. And then they went into the showers, and this was common. If you were lucky in places, water would come out. If you were not lucky, gas would come out. Belzec was, only gas would come out. Nobody survived Belzec. I've heard about 800,000 Jews were murdered in Belzec. So my mother had she had two brothers, two sisters. One of the brothers worked at the railroad station, and their job was to clean the Jewish men who worked for the railroad station, was to clean the cars when they came back empty from Belzec. And what they'd find was identification papers from people about 18 years old, dollar bills torn into small pieces. I'm telling you things that I was at that point 3.5 years old. I'm telling you from the diary what I know. Otherwise, I'll tell you things I remember. And there was a lot of disease in the ghetto. There was hunger. A lot of Jews died in the ghetto. I had typhus. I was 4 years old, 3.5. I had typhus. Many people died from it. You got very high fevers at night, and people would become delirious. And there was no medication, so either you died or you lived. The second action, I'll tell you one incident I remember. Somebody grabbed my hand, and we would have these hiding places that we put up in the ghettos. And there was a pantry somewhere in that house, and I was sitting on my grandfather's lap the whole time. And the Germans were all around rounding up any Jews they could find. And a little boy started crying. Crying was very dangerous for children in the war. That he's thirsty. And we whispered, he's got to drink something. They couldn't stop him. So his father urinated into a cup and gave him to drink. That was the second action. Since my uncles worked for the railroad, he knew what was coming. The third action was going to be the final one. So he would sneak out of the ghetto at night under the barbed wire. And my family lived in Sokal for many generations, going back to the 1700s. And they knew all the people because they had, they did business with them, they had dealings with them, they were their neighbors. And he asked them to hide his family. And he he was turned down everywhere because you couldn't blame them. If you were discovered hiding Jews, they would murder you and your family. So it was a very dangerous thing to try to hide a Jew. Plus, there was an incentive given to the population to turn in their neighbors if they were hiding Jews. He went to see Miss Francesca Halamayeva. They knew her. She lived with her daughter, Helena. Francesca must have been in her 50s. At that time, Helena was in her 20s. He had spoken to Francesca's brother, but he was afraid to take us in. And Francesca said, yeah, I'll hide your family. So when the third action happened, and my family knew it was the last one, they had a sister who was very sick. She had tuberculosis. So they wanted a doctor with them. So they got a very prominent doctor, Dr. David Kindler in town, his wife and 2 sons. We lived along the Book River in our town, which divided our town. And so we walked along the river to Francesca's house that night. I remember, I guess at that point I was probably almost 4. And I remember the walk, and we got there. Little houses. If any of you have been back in some of these small towns, Poland, or some of them are in Ukraine now, everybody's next to each other. And we got to her house. She sent us in the back of the house to her barn. She had pigs downstairs, and there was a ladder that led up to a trap door. And we walked up there. We moved the trap door. We walked into the hay loft because there was hay on the straw on the floor, and it was this type of a roof. And there were 13 of us there. Before we left, I was the youngest. There were 2 other children. They had, my mother's 2 brothers had the speech with me. Children cry. That's why I told you the other story. These houses are very close to each other. If you cry, we'll be destroyed because we'll be found out. The neighbors will report her, and we'll all be captured. And there were 13 of us plus the 2 Halamayevas. They would have been murdered too. So I promised I wasn't going to cry. And when I got there, and I think it happened pretty soon, I started crying. Can I read you a portion? I don't know if I have the time, from the diary where he explains it. Anybody have any questions now? I hope I didn't. I'm trying to simplify it as much as I can. Because I do want to tell you, the decision at that point when one of my uncles said, don't take her, what he suggested, they weren't going to leave me, was to put me in front of a church or a convent. And usually the priests or the nuns would take little children or babies in. And many of those children who survived, their parents never came back. They were murdered. And are finding out these last few years that they were Jewish. They never knew it. And there was a very good Polish woman, a movie made, Ida, I-D-A, that tells that story. She becomes a nun. But she has finally learned the story. So that was a not uncommon practice. So now, anybody have any comments, questions?
Now is the time for questions. Does anybody have a question they would like to ask?
Yeah. That was after the war. My family, it wasn't just my family, many of the Jews, there were 3 children, and when we'd walk around speaking Polish, they said after what we went through, we were in a place, I remember we were in Hungary, and we were in a big place, and somebody said to us, stop speaking Polish. In my case, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for a Polish Catholic woman and her daughter, but that didn't happen to everybody. So when I got up there, I started crying, and this I remember. My little 4-year-old niece, Leah's daughter, Faye, won't stop crying. We all beg her to keep quiet. We give her toys, holiday gifts to divert her, but nothing helps. Mrs. Holomayova comes up to us and says, for mercy's sake, can't you people make that child stop crying? Do you want the Germans to find you and kill us all? She takes a stick and begins to beat the pigs. She hopes their squeaks of pain will drown out the sound of Faye's crying. The hours go by. Faye is still crying. We are all terrified. Mrs. Holomayova and Hella are still beating the pigs, but how much longer can they keep this up? And how much longer will the poor little pigs be able to stand this? At about 8 o'clock that evening, Mrs. Holomayova knocks on a hayloft door with her stick. That's how she communicated. We open the door. You'll have to do something, she says, very much upset. If this crying goes on, it'll be the end of all of us. We promise her that we will do something. After she has left, we huddle together and discuss what we should do. We come to a terrible decision. We will have to kill Faye with poison from Dr. Kindler's medical bag. We can't endanger 14 other lives, those of our family, the Kindlers, the doctor, and the 2 Holomayovas, because of one child. We report our decision to Mrs. Holomayova. She doesn't say a word. What could she say? Faye goes on crying. We cover Faye with blankets. Dr. Kindler pours a spoonful of poison from one of his vials and forces the spoon between Faye's lips. Faye makes a face, spits it out, and keeps on crying. I remember a pill, but maybe it was both. Finally, some of the poison seems to stay in. After a few minutes, Faye stops crying. Her eyes fall shut. She appears unconscious. She does not seem to be breathing. We all squat around the little figure, lying on the straws if we were already sitting shiva after the funeral. No one makes a sound. My sister Leah, Faye's mother, does not weep. I forgive you for what you have done to my child, she whispers, as long as God forgives you too. One life for a chance to save 14 other lives. My mother said her plan was, when they took me down, to jump down and jump in the river next door, the Book River that ran next door. 2 hours later, at about 10 o'clock, Mrs. Holomayova comes to us holding out a large burlap bag. The child's soul is with God now, she says in a voice that betrays no emotion. Put her in this bag. I'll bury her. Dr. Kindler leans forward to pick up the limp little body from the straw. As he touches the child, his sensitive hands feel something unexpected. He motions to me and whispers in my ear, "There's a pulse, it's faint, but I can feel it. This child is alive." it takes a moment to grasp what the doctor is saying. Then I say that if the child wasn't killed by the dose of poison he gave her, it is nothing short of a miracle. Faye was meant to live. We spent 22 months there in this hayloft. There were a number of incidents. I know I don't have the time to say how we were caught, almost caught. We were liberated in July 1944 by the Soviet Union before Auschwitz because we were right on the Russian border. And that's when my mother found out what happened to my father and the other 400 Jewish men. And she says, there's no life for us here anymore, and we left. I just want to tell you, if I have it quickly, one incident that I remember. The Ukrainians and the Poles were enemies also at that time. I don't know. Okay. They would put notices on her door, you must leave. They wanted her property, and they were running the town under the Germans. So she said, if we have to leave, we'll all be caught. We will, maybe we can save one child. So first they took down the doctor's son. He was also 4 years old. And he was a beautiful little blonde boy, blue eyes. They took him down. But then they brought him back because at that time only Jewish boys were circumcised. And a lot of Jewish men had that danger. And there was a good movie, Europa, tells you that story. So then they decided to give him a shot with me, though they didn't trust me too much. So at that point, she went to the priest and she said, I found this little girl wandering around. I need Polish papers and we're going to take her. They gave me a name, Marysia Janusz, and they taught me all the prayers, Patras, I think they called it. You know, every day in hiding, I had to say the prayers. And I remember saying to my mother, maybe I was 5 at that point, because we were there for almost 2 years. Let me look at you. I know what was going on. I might never see you again. And everybody started crying. And they took me down, and Helena, at that point, had gotten married, and they took me to Lvov. But they kept me hidden in the house because they were afraid, you know, a child might say anything. So that was an incident. There were others. That one I want to tell you about.
Francis, I'm sorry to interrupt you right now, but perhaps right now we could just give some time for the students to ask any questions if they have anything more for you, and then we shall continue with Zosia Sherman, okay? And of course we will continue the conversations after this main part, okay? So don't worry about it. All the guests, all the ladies can tell you more when we have the part after the main one. So maybe right now Zosia Sherman will continue. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for the lovely letters and drawings and feelings and concern that I got. I don't remember when I was so wzruszona and poruszona, like when I got your gifts. I will give them for eternity, which I am close to, and I am reading it. My grandson and son read them, and they were also deeply moved. It is most important to educate children of tragedy that happened, but I think in a way history repeats itself, and mankind always goes on killing and fighting. Look now. And it's just, but I just wanted to say a few words. Whoever had the wonderful idea of the letters to the survivors is a bloody genius and should be thanked with all my heart. Now, I will start at 1942, because as she said, we were first occupied by the Soviets, which was bad, but not tragic. It was terrible, but the Jews were not exterminated as later. My uncle had the brains to know, because he came from Warsaw, what will happen in Lviv when the Germans come. They were there already. And at the age of 5, I was given away to peasants, to a farm near Lviv. And I cannot tell you the feeling of a 5-year-old child living home, loving family, toys, beautiful apartment, and going to a farm where you are mistreated, you are lonely, you are hopeless. It's a baby, 5 years spoiled girl. So it was terrible. They quickly put me to work. They gave me, how do you say, miotła, a sweeper, broom. And I had to sweep the barn and clean, and where the chickens were, chicken coop. It was above my ability and strength to do it. I was punished, mistreated, hungry. It was dreadful hell of a year. And I didn't know what is happening. I knew something is wrong, and I got a new name, but I didn't know what's wrong. I didn't know, nobody explained. But as a child, you feel that you have to, because it was our motto to behave, be good, and don't bring attention to yourself. So I tried. After a year, my mother came and took me back to Warsaw. And there again, we were plagued by blackmailers. I don't know if any of you know what they are. They are awful men that hunt Jews for money, and it's a game. They zero on a child. They ask prayers and ask you who you really are. Tell us your name. Tell us who is this, who is that. And then they're paid money and they leave you alone. But if you don't answer properly, then you are in bad way. In any event, we are lucky enough always to come out. Maybe there were 5 or 6 incidents like this. And we were lucky enough to come out of it. But after I almost, or maybe had a breakdown, because I said after the last time, I am going to give you all away. I can't take it anymore. I must have been 5.5 then. And lo and behold, I ended up in a convent boarding school of Urszulanki. And there also was no peace, because there were often visits from Germans looking for underground people and Jewish children that the Germans sort of suspected that they were harbored, and ask us questions and prayers. And one incident was that the little boy, he was also my age, 5 or 6, said, "My name is not Piotruś at all." And the nun quickly hit him and said, "You naughty boy, you made in your pants again." So he started to cry, and she took him out. She was very brave. She saved all of our lives, because if they asked him, "What's your name?" and he would say Moshe or something, or Isaac, they would have killed all of us, the whole convent, and so on. So, but I am very lucky person, because out of 11 children, 10 perished. I am the 11th that is alive, and it's a miracle. She is 11th, she is 11th. It is really by the grace of God. So I am very happy person in many ways, but also in many ways, Holocaust took its mark on me, because It took my country away from me, my identity, my childhood, my family, the whole family apart from two. It took my beloved roots, Poland. I am a nomad. Every country, I don't feel I belong. I will always feel odd woman out. It leaves something, a scar in your soul. I don't know if you ever read a story by Niemcewicz, Cudzoziemka. I don't know if it's still on. Do you know the book of Niemcewicz? I am the one. I read it as a child in convent. So really it is, but I carry on. I feel I am stronger and better able to adjust than people that did not go through the war. And I also want to acknowledge with deep, deep gratefulness the hero Polish people, the good ones that helped us, hid us, fed us, adopted even many of us. And that's how we survived. And we are also called the hidden children of Holocaust, because we were hidden by good people that did help. Not everybody was out for money and to kill us. So maybe there is hope for humanity. And I want to thank you again very, very much for coming and listening to our stories. Thank you.
Okay, does anybody want to ask questions to Mrs. Zofia Sherman?
Who's one person that helped you the most during the Holocaust?
Frankly, I don't remember so well. I know it was sometimes paid, sometimes not. I mean, the farm I know was paid. I cannot remember, there were so many. You know, we called it, I don't know if the word Melina. You know what Melina means? So when you were caught as a Jewess, or the family of my mother and grandmother and I, we had to look for another Melina, like thieves. So I don't know the people that did help us. I do remember the people that came to kill us, you know, the awful people that did it for money and asked me prayers and questions, because even the Gestapo zeroed on children. It's like little Piotruś, children are blabbermouths. But we were well trained, because I don't want to scare you and give you examples. I've seen executions, I saw people killed, so I knew what will happen. And my mother said to me, that will happen to you if you say who you really are. But I didn't know what was wrong. I didn't know what a Jew means. You know, I was a child. Only later I understood. And I'm proud of it, that I survived. And most of all, to my mother and grandmother that were such brave women and lied through the teeth and did everything to save me. And also, as I say, the Polish people. Thank you.
Yeah, one more question here.
How many other Jewish hidden children were with you that in the school? How many other Jewish children that were like hidden under fake identities were with you in the school, in the convent?
Apart from Piotruś, I don't know, because it was a big secret. And none of the children, even smaller than you, the only one that was trying to give us away without, because we were in convent, you get taught to be honest and truthful, and we were liars, all of us. So Piotruś didn't agree with it, so he decided to tell the Germans his real name. None of us, we never knew. We never talked. Besides, we pretended to be Catholics, and I was. I am half Catholic now, almost like a schizophrenic, because I was in convent till the age of 13. But we don't know. Can you keep a secret?
Anybody else? Yeah.
Why did you have to say the prayers? Oh.
Because to show that you are active Catholic, that you are not Jewish.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, sure.
And you had to know the Testament and babble on spot when they say Hail Mary, say Aniele Boży. You know, you had to know. And for 5-6-year-old child to learn all that and change your name every 5 minutes. My mother tried to make it into a game, but it wasn't a game, it was hard work. That's why I'm not too keen on studying and working, because I feel I did it when I was young.
Yes, so if I could
It's
just
a wrong
quickly
message, sorry children.
sum it up. So if you were a Jew and you were discovered to be a Jew, you could get into big troubles or even get killed. You and your family and other people who were with you. So to save all the kids, they were taken by the convents, so like the churches, for example, or the nuns, or by Polish families who were Catholic, and their identities, the children's identities, were changed into Catholic. So they were pretending all the time that they know the Catholic prayers, and they have Catholic, like Polish names, let's say. So if there were people who were trying to discover or hunt them, they would be able to say these prayers. So these people who were trying to catch them, they would ask one kid in a street, for example, like, are you Jewish or you're Polish? And the kids were like taught to say they are Polish. So they would say, I'm Polish, but you have to prove it now. So how would they prove it? By saying Catholic prayers, right? Because the Jewish that didn't know Catholic prayers, and the same way around, like Catholic people usually don't really know Jewish prayers, right? So this was this kind of, way to hide and run away from the horrible truth. So yeah, this is basically what Mrs. Sherman went through, and that's why she has been in the convent, etc. So do you understand now? Yes? Okay, perfect. So now maybe let's give the voice to Mrs. Frankel.
Thank you. Well, I was born 6 weeks before the war started, before the Germans invaded Poland. And we lived in Katowice, which is in the west, and my parents somehow were smart enough to run to the east, where my grandparents lived, also near Lwów, near Przemyśl. Everybody knows now where Przemyśl is, after the Ukrainian refugees came through Przemyśl. I personally don't remember things, but I know them because the people who helped the family during the war would come all the time after the war to our house, and they were constantly talking about it. And there were many Polish people who helped the family. Of the people who survived from my family, nobody was in the concentration camp. Nobody even went to the ghetto, except of my adopted sister, who is my cousin, and she was in the Przemyśl ghetto. She was a little girl. She turned, before yesterday, she turned 90. And the woman I was hidden in whose house I was hidden, she went to the ghetto and brought my cousin out. She was a tiny girl. She just wrapped her in some shawl and got her out. Her parents were killed. Her brother was killed. Whoever survived of the family that I know was helped by the Polish people and some Ukrainian people. When my parents came to the east, where my grandparents lived, and they had some land, and we stayed there until the Germans came closer to it was on the River San. My parents left me with a woman who was a daughter of my grandmother's housekeeper. And I have the picture of the woman because when I got married, I decided that she was my second mother and she has to meet my husband, so he went to Poland with me. And this is where I stayed. It was quite easy because we all spoke very good Polish without any Jewish accents. I was a blonde child with blue eyes, so this was my ciocia Józia, and my mother was supposedly her cousin. And it was, well, they were very poor people. It was near Przemyśl, they had a small house. He was a cobbler, or szewc. He was also an alcoholic. So every night he went to the bar and got drunk, but not enough to betray that he had Jews in his house, that he had a Jewish child in his house. Sometimes he even remembered to bring me a piece of cake. I didn't stay there all the time because once in a while we have to leave. They were afraid that people would come and betray them to the Germans. So there were some other families. There was a family of a professor from Poznań. He was a professor of the Polish language. And this is where my mother left me. I don't know how she found those people, really. But the husband didn't know about it. Their name was Wołyński. Mrs. Wołyński knew that I was Jewish. No, she didn't actually in the beginning until she found out from me. Because she, I was a little girl, you know, so I remembered my grandparents at that time. So one day she asked me, you know, when this is all over and you come with your mother and I will come and visit you, where would I stay? I say, well, you know, Grandma, you can stay in the Bożnica. Well, who had Bożnica? She knew immediately whom she was talking to. But she never told her husband, she never told her two daughters. I stayed there for a while. Then I came back to ciocia Józia. Then some members of my family were staying with some Polish people in another villages, my uncle, my aunt. Actually, I have name of those people in the Ulma Museum. They have plaques over there, you know about the museum. And they have plaques for the people who are saving and helping Jews to survive, so I made sure that as many of them as possible have plaques. I went there to the opening. Well, if it wasn't for the Polish people, we really wouldn't have survived. Though somebody once must have noticed it and must have betrayed us, because my mother was there with me with my ciocia Józia, and the father was coming, and somebody told her that the Germans were looking for a Jewish woman with a child. It was obviously me and my mother. So they managed to ship me out to my aunt, who was staying with some Ukrainians, but my parents didn't have where to go, so they stayed. And there was a barn there, so they put them in the barn, put some, you know, pieces of wood, made like a hiding place, put some straw on top of it. It was almost towards the end of the war. It was like 2 or 3 weeks before the war ended. Now, to mention ciocia Józia and her husband, they were Methodists, and they were Volksdeutsch because their name was Klinger. And so when the Germans came, they usually, you know, if somebody was in, they would close the barn from the inside, but they had brain enough to not to do that. They closed it from the outside. The Germans came and said immediately to open the barn. So they did. One of them came. He jumped on this place where my parents were hidden. My parents never knew if he knew it was the end and didn't want to see them, because if he moved a little, he would fall in, or if he moved some straw, he would see them. But he went out, came out, and said there is nobody there. So at that moment, my uncle, Klinger, he spoke German. He says, well, was ich ein Volksdeutscher, ich würde die Juden halten. What, I, a Volksdeutscher, I would keep the Jews here. Started to yell. Ciocia tried to calm him down, and they left. The Germans left. So that was our miracle of survival. I think everybody who survived, it was a miracle in some way. I'm very happy that you are learning about those things. And I don't know if it's going to prevent it or anything, or everybody says so it would never happen again. It keeps happening over and over again. So let's just make sure that doesn't happen too much. Okay?
Thank you so much. Is there anybody who would like to?
Do you or the other two ladies have any possessions that survived the time of the Holocaust?
Our personal note, no.
Anybody else with questions? No? Oh, yes.
How did you find yourself in America?
Oh, well, we stayed in Poland until 1960. And then my parents decided to emigrate. Most of the family left by then, so we are the only one left in Poland. And this is how we came here. We came on American quota. Do you know what quota is? The Americans had a certain number of people that they would let from different countries to the United States. And obviously, probably right after the war, my father applied for it. And then suddenly it came. So we left.
Okay, thank you so much. So perhaps right now we can go forward with our surprise. Michał Jamrożek singing for us today, and especially for our guests of honor.
Wciąż płaczę, gdy Ciebie zobaczę, Warszawo, Warszawo mo. Tam w Kietrzcie głód i nędza i chłód, i gorsza od głodu tęsknota, Warszawo mo. Warszawo ma, patrz wokół mnie łza, bo nie wiem, czy jeszcze zobaczę Cię jutro, Warszawo ma. Warszawo ma, o Warszawo ma. Wciąż płaczę, gdy Ciebie zobaczę, Warszawo, Warszawo ma. Warszawo ma, patrz wokół mnie łza, bo nie wiem, czy jeszcze zobaczę Cię jutro, Warszawo ma. przylecą ptaszki Twe, otoczą koło nóż, kołyskę Twoją tu, łobotek w dłoni ma, tam gdzieś we zgliszczach stał. Córeczko, idę stąd w świata kąt. Bóg zamknął jasny świat, noc czarna wkoło nas. Chwalimy siebie, strach kroki nasze wiedzie. Stoimy razem tu, w godzinę złego snu. Nie wiemy dokąd iść i gdzie nasz dom. Wygnali nago nas na pola czarny pas. W ciemności nocy, wśród sztormu mocy, córeczko, tylko wiatr wygnali z domu tak. Nad przepaść wiedzie już na świata dno.
Thank you, Michał. Thank you so much for your absolutely beautiful voice. Okay, so this is going to be looking forward the end of the first, like this part of the meeting. I would just ask President Andraka to say a few words.
Thank you so much for a really true lesson about the Holocaust. Thank you, General Consul, that we worked together many years, but this project is very important, our student. We try to show our student true story about the Holocaust, the younger generation. So let me say thank you, my student, my teacher and principal. It's so hard because a few weeks ago, I read a very interesting book about the Holocaust, News from Holocaust, pielęgniarka z Holokaustu. And I tried to remembering everything about the book and what you say about your experience. So my student, thank you so much that you work together with your teachers, with parents. Dziękuję wam z całego serca za to, że jesteście wspaniałą grupą młodzieży, która potrafi pracować i uczyć się o historii, historii prawdziwej, o historii, którą będziecie mogli przekazać swoim dzieciom, młodszym, jak będziecie już dorośli, tak jak my, swoim wnukom. Dziękuję, kochani dyrektorzy, nauczyciele, a przede wszystkim rodzice, że jesteście tutaj. Panie konsulu, wielki pokłon, szapoba dla pana za to, że stara pan się tą edukację wtłaczać w życie amerykańskiej edukacji. Bardzo, bardzo dziękuję. Proszę teraz dziewczynki o podejście i podziękowanie naszym gościom. We want to say thank you and give your flowers for our students. Okay, thank you so much. And also I want to say thank you for Michał and my teacher Dominik Grzyb and my Ania Tracz and Anetka Matyszczyk from Centrala Polskich Schools of Support.